Moscone to come in and talk to us about the new laws with respect to landlords and tenants. There's two issues. One is the new coronavirus issue, more temporary. And then the second is the state laws that went into effect January 1st. So, Eric, just starting, I'm going to pose this as a owner of 18 units in Buena Park. So there's an Orange County question, and then 30 units in Whittier. So I'm going to come to you and say, I own property in Orange County, I own property in LA County. Tell my viewers, just starting out with the coronavirus, what's changed, what can you do, what can't you do?
What you can't do right now is evict practically anyone for anything. In fact, at this point, the State Judicial Council has a rule preventing and suspending all evictions, and the way they did that is they disallowed the issuance of summonses and the not setting unlawful detainer trials. So you have no way to go through the court process to accomplish evictions, and that's statewide. Plus, right as of this point, the courts aren't open and operating to do much of anything. Orange County Superior Court won't be opening until after Memorial Day, or actually, yeah, right after Memorial Day. And then they have restrictions on any unlawful detainer trials until probably after July 15th. And that's for cases that have already been filed. And as of right now, nothing new is allowed to be filed. So that's really the first problem.
So Eric, are you saying that if I'm a tenant, okay, and I live in one of these 18 units, and I stop paying rent April 1st, there's no recourse?
There really isn't, no. The only types of evictions that get any kind of love at this point are something that's related to health and safety. But for non-payment of rent, there's practically no recourse.
So what would you recommend? I own these 18 units, and 3 of my tenants aren't paying any rent. And then I call them, and they talk to them, and they say, I lost my job, I have no income, I can't afford to move because security deposits required, I'm stuck here, and the state's told me to stay in shelter in place. What do I do? What would you recommend I do?
Well, and what's interesting is actually that last point that you said, and the government has told me to shelter in place. That's what the Judicial Council relied upon, is if we're telling people to shelter in place, we can't kick them out of where they're sheltering in place. So at this point, yes, if they're not paying rent, the best thing you can do is try and work with your tenants. Obviously, there are tenants who are going to take advantage of the situation, but a lot of tenants really are in a bad situation. So whatever you can get and whatever you can work out informally with your tenants is certainly to your advantage, because it'll be months before you realistically can get to a point when you can actually kick out a tenant for non-payment of rent.
I'm going to interrupt this conversation for a announcement or an advertisement. This is very confusing. I'm confused. So I'm going to give you Eric's private number, 562-567-8377. 562-567-8377. His email address is efrancesconi@fyklaw.com. EFRANCISCONI@fyklaw.com. As realtors, we're not allowed to give legal advice. And I've had a lot of questions from clients saying, what's the deal? And these are two major changes that I don't think you want to get involved in. Now, on that note, let's say I have $1,000 rent, $1,000, each of these tenants pays $1,000. Would you recommend partial payment? So would you go to the tenants and say, hey, listen, you owe me $1,000 a month, you lost your job, I'll take $300, I'll take $500, and we'll figure something out later on, and put that in writing?
It makes a lot of sense to do that so there's a clear understanding. Some municipalities, for example, the city of Los Angeles, is allowing tenants 12 months to make up past due rent. The county of Los Angeles, in an order that was just extended yesterday, is giving tenants 6 months to make up that past due rent. So if you can work out some kind of situation and commit it to writing that explains what the obligations are, I think the argument, though, would be it would have to be at a minimum what the city and county are allowing. If you agree, like for example, if somebody says I can pay you rent, I can make it up in 3 months, and they're a resident of LA County. then that's great. However, if you try to enforce that later on and say they didn't make it up in 3 months, then the tenant will be able to raise to the court, well, the county says I have 6 months to do it. So yes, I agreed to the 3 months, but that made it more restrictive.
So the bottom line, Eric, is see if you can work something out with your tenant that you find reasonable, they find reasonable, because you have no other option, you can't kick them out. But whatever you come up and write with in writing, run it by an attorney.
Yes.
So talk to your tenant, work something out, and then get a hold of Eric and have him bless it for a nominal fee. What else about the coronavirus new laws or regulations or edicts do you think people don't know or need to know about?
I think it really does come back to what is possible now as opposed to what was possible before. I mean, you can talk about all sorts of things as far as, what the Board of Supervisors is doing in LA County, or you've got the city of Santa Ana who is imposing rent freeze. You can talk about all that, but really the overarching point is it's not business as usual out there anymore. So you really aren't left with a lot of recourse. And California, not surprisingly, is really falling to the protection of tenants at this point at the expense of landlords.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned maybe 60% of the voting population is renters.
That's what I
Something
understand.
like
The
that.
city, and it was in the city or county of LA, I was reading that 60% of households are actually renting. So, and you consider with the renters, I don't know what the statistics are as to how many of them are, being hit by this new wave of unemployment. I'm sure it's disproportionate to, those who are, more affluent. But it's something that it's going to definitely trickle down to the entire rental market, which is obviously very large.
Right now, the unemployment rate is 14-15%, but I read that in LA County, 40% of the people have lost their jobs or not going to their jobs. So this is going to be a big issue. I think the average tenant has a month or two maybe in reserves, but when you get to the third and fourth month, it complicates it. But then what complicates it further is people are getting unemployment insurance that's more than what they were getting in income at some point in time. And I read you're not allowed to confiscate that, or you're not allowed to go after that income to then pay their tenants. So they could take the unemployment insurance, which is more than their regular compensation, and then tell the landlord, I lost my job, and get away with not paying rent. So,
And
what a country! Only in America.
Well, what's interesting about it too is that there are, if you're dealing with a commercial tenant, for example, you're, generally within your rights. If they're coming to you with some kind of financial situation, and we deal with this as well, then, a lender, for example, or a landlord will say, okay, well, show me your financials. Let's talk about why you need the relief you're asking me for. None of this relief in residential tenancy, you don't have to make a single showing to show that you are basically unable to pay.
So if
As
you're
long
my
as as long as you tell the landlord that you are in that kind of situation, you're not entitled as a landlord to say, okay, give me your financials, show me something else. So,
I have no obligation. I have no obligation to tell you, to prove to you that I've been damaged.
you don't have to prove it. You have to say it. And again, so much of this analysis we're talking about depends on the particular jurisdiction you're in. California has broad laws as to govern all of this, and those are both through the Judicial Council, through the governor's orders. But when you get to specific jurisdictions, cities, counties, then that's something that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, because there can be more restrictive laws pertaining to each individual municipality.
But the state law says, you're my landlord, you can't make me prove, I'm just gonna say I lost my job and the coronavirus has hurt my income. That's all I have to say statewide for you to accept that reality. I don't have to prove it, correct?
Right, there's nothing you can do to require them to provide you proof of that.
That's fun. One more time, Eric's phone number is 562-567-8377, 562-567-8377. Email address, efrancisconi@fyklaw.com. Don't guess, don't anticipate, don't read something on the internet and then think that's good. Negotiate with your tenants, call Eric, have him write it up legally, and then this is going to be a long-term mess. My biggest concern is you can defer rent payments for 4 months, 3 months, 6 months, but then after that, there's no way you can go back to the tenants and say, okay, now the coronavirus situation has abated, you owe me $12,000 in rent, I need it by the first of the month. It's not gonna happen. There's no way. So even if you come up with an agreement like this, as an attorney, how in the world do you enforce this? So in this scenario, 18 units in Buena Park, $1,000 a month, I gave you half, $500 a month. Now I owe, $5,000 for that time period. I can't pay you back. How do you come after me as a landlord?
I mean, theoretically, any kind of, with a law like this, when it's saying you have a certain amount of time to pay, let's borrow from LA County, for example, where it's saying you have 6 months to repay. Orange County actually right now does not have something like that to the best of my knowledge. But if we're assuming that where you have a certain amount of time to repay an obligation, if they don't repay the obligation in a period of time, do you have a recourse? Well, sure. You have, at that point, you probably have eviction proceedings you can do. You can pursue them for a judgment. But again, to what extent is that going to be collectible, even if you were to get a judgment for that amount? For a lot of tenants who don't have a considerable amount of resources, and if they did, they probably wouldn't be in that situation in the first place. It's going to be very difficult to be able to get anything out of a judgment.
So bottom line, your tenant comes to you, try to work something out, get it in writing, and then run it by Eric. Second question, Eric, let's say the coronavirus issue never happened, and we're here, everybody's healthy, there's no problem. January 1st, a whole bunch of laws went into place. What do the viewers need to know about the January 1st rent control laws that has changed?
Well, again, that's one where there's an overarching state law, which is AB 1482, or at least that was the Assembly Bill the laws are based on, and now the laws are part of the California Civil Code. But what those laws did was impose a restriction on the amount of a rental increase per year. It imposed restrictions on being able to evict tenants. For what cause you could evict them. You had to either do it for just cause or for essentially no cause, but you couldn't do it for a bad cause, and it's all specified within the statutes. But then you have that broad state law restricting how rent can be increased. But then you have municipalities, again, coming in with more restrictive laws. For example, LA County, which covers all of LA County, where a city doesn't have more restrictive laws than even it does, or for the unincorporated parts of LA County, where they have their own restrictions, which are even more onerous on how much you can increase rent.
Is it 3% or 5%? What is the statewide?
Statewide, it's essentially 8%. Well, it's actually 5% plus the local CPI, based on the U.S. Bureau of I don't have to double check the name of it.
Inflation.
Yeah. No, it's a CPI. It's inflation rate. Yes, you're right.
Consumer Price Index.
Consumer Price Index.
So it's a basket of goods
right.
that go up or down.
So you can go upwards of 10%, I think, statewide, is my understanding. But in LA County, it's 8%. At a maximum. And even that, if interest rates are lower, then it's actually going to be less than that.
Well, what about evictions, aside from the rent amount? Have they changed the ability of a landlord to evict tenants? Or what's that?
It really
has.
has.
That changed?
It's changed a lot. You no longer can evict tenants at will or even at the end of a lease, essentially, other than for some kind of cause. And, it's actually pretty technical. You have to kind of go through the law to determine what cause is appropriate. I mean, if you have a single family residence or something and you want to move, you're the property owner and you want to move back into it, yes, you can do it, but there are certain protections you have to provide and probably relocation assistance in certain circumstances. But other than for something that's a straight health and safety violation, which would then be good cause, you can proceed, but you have to show some kind of cause before you can proceed to an eviction.
I've received a lot of calls on both of these issues, and that's why I asked Eric to come in. And this is not our regular talk show format, but I wanted Eric to take the whole segment. So again, if you have questions on either the new laws as it refers to the coronavirus issue or the new massive statewide rent control laws and changes in landlord-tenant relationships, give Eric a call at 562-567-8377, 562-567-8377, or EFRANCISCONI@FYKLAW.com. He said if you mention my name, he'll charge you 25% more in legal fees. So,
Can I just make one last
Yeah.
note? And as great as it is that we can talk about this, and I really appreciate you having me on, thank you. A general discussion about all of this does not substitute for an actual attorney-client kind of communication in which an attorney researches your particular circumstance and talks to you about your issues rather than just broad areas of law.
of course, yeah, your individual city, your individual situation. Now, during this time, you're meeting with clients in your office or on the phone, or what? If someone calls you right now, what's the relationship?
That number and that email that you've given out a few times, and again, thank you for that. Go directly to me. That goes to my cell phone. That I'm checking that email all the time. We do meetings by phone. We do meetings by Zoom or Blue Jeans. Video meetings like that. We are accessible as much as, if not more, than when we were in the office.
If you're a landlord, call Eric. If you're a tenant and you're renting right now, you want to know what your rights are, give Eric a call. He's agreed to give an initial consultation and then try to get you in if it's more detailed stuff. 562-567-8377, 562-567-8377, EFRANCISCONI@FYKLAW.com. Thanks for watching.